we'd always fund a great first-time founder, but they need to be willing and ready for like a crazy journey. And truth is, most first-time founders are not. They have absolutely no clue how goddamn hard entrepreneurship is.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with a ton of pleasure. I have Daniel Dippold here with me today. He is the chairman and founder, CEO of EWOR, which is essentially a for-profit venture fund without LPs. He'll give you all the details about it. But the fun thing for me is I get to spend more time talking to Dan. I'll call you Danny if that's okay. With Danny on this call, because like he and I first met up in San Francisco. We went and had really good croissants. And I don't know, you got to tell me, was that still the highlight of your trip to San Francisco? The best entire part was the croissants or what?
Absolutely. The croissants in our conversation, of course. Huh?
You got to tell me, was the croissant in San Francisco better than the croissants you can get in Europe, especially in France? Don't start a war between France. Trump has already started a war between France and the United States and the rest of Europe. But like, better croissants in San Francisco or in France or Europe?
The croissants were surprisingly good for San Francisco, but they're not better than what we get.
Oh, I don't know. Surprisingly good. I don't know. I think it's been a while since I've been to Europe, but I think we have really good croissants in San Francisco. We do it right. Maybe there's a slight tinge of sourdough or something, because everything here is a nice little sourdough starter to it, but delicious all the same. So anyways, Danny, once again, welcome to the show. You started 5 different companies. Some are nonprofit, some are for-profit, you name it. You started 5 different companies. You've had some big exits yourself. Walk us through just briefly at a high level, your backgrounds and why anyone should care to listen to you talk for the next sort of hour plus.
Okay. I'm going to go through the entities very quickly, and then I'm quickly going to go through what I'm personally most proud of. And then if you want to dig any deeper, we can do that.
We will definitely dig deeper.
Yeah, I did theoretical math and business. I started a sound wave company that measured emotion in sound waves. I then afterwards started a consumer app that had a rather sophisticated technical backend that was using what you'd probably call LLMs today. Back then, also lots of NLP in order to detect emotion in text and do like intelligent coaching. And then I built a banking company that made it very easy to deploy or to change deployed AI. That one I started with the CFO of Procter & Gamble Europe, and I started it with the CMO of T-Mobile and the CMO of Motorola, and they had incredible customer access. And I could, of course, build the tech. I was the CTO, and that scaled very quickly, over $1 million of revenue in the first year. And was a first.
This is Unlimitix?
That is New Now Group.
New Now Group. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And I haven't sold that company since. We bootstrapped this because like every one of us had like proceeds. And it's also really important information when I talk to many founders, right? You don't need to get all of your companies venture funded. And for us, it's of course a really great case that this is not venture funded. We have a lot of freedom there. And the growth is still exceptional because the bottleneck for us is not money. And then in order to focus on EWOR, I dropped out. There's an external CEO running this company. She's ex-BCG, incredibly clever, probably even the better person for the phase we're currently in. Then I started a nonprofit, Sigma Squared Society, scaled this to 40 countries.
What does Sigma Squared do? Like, describe that to people.
Yeah, I would describe it as something like, think of YPO or EO, but for people who can't afford it, and for people who can't meet the metrics of like, I think it's 5 million revenue or so, because they're in their 20s. Right. So Sigma is for people who are 25 or younger. Those are the people who need the support the most. They need this network, but they don't get it. So the gap back then, especially 10 years ago in Switzerland, this was absolutely insane, right? Like your founder, you're 19 years, you're 20, and everyone is just looking at you as like, what the hell are you doing? This is really hard to get sometimes for people who live in San Francisco. They're like, you just build your company. There's people who will give you money. Nah, not in Europe. And this is where Sigma Squared started, right? Like it's definitely Really important for founders that early on to get a strong network. Now in a post-COVID world, it's gotten better. And we finally now also have a San Francisco chapter because the value prop is not only this anymore, it's also that global community. So you're in Uganda and there's a chapter and you're going to have a couch to crash on. So no matter what you do, it's got to be people all over the world supporting you, for founders, by founders, and that's really what we do. We support people who need it most and help them build incredible companies. And I think the community now raised over 2 billion. 13 unicorns happened, and those people are in their 20s, right? It's insane to think about that. And of course, also, like with the proceeds from my ventures, I backed quite a couple of those people, sometimes pre-idea, pre-pitch deck, and I never thought I'd get a return on that. This was more of a like, hey, you're a young founder, you're doing something incredible, I'm here to help. And of course, like, I was really surprised, like 2 of them built unicorns.
Nice job in the investing.
Yeah, it was insane. Like a couple of companies that made it beyond 1 billion, where I was just like blown away how fast this could happen. I mean, I'm investing now since 5 years. I think there's 6 companies now that are either over 1 billion or very close to 1 billion, as in kind of 700 million plus, and more, right? Like every year. So that for me also was really interesting to watch. And then eventually I said, I want to do something that I enjoy doing like every single day. And that definitely included investing. I could have, though, never been a full-time angel investor, because it's like, I'm not building anything. I'm not building a scalable organization or something like this. And this is why I do EWOR now, because EWOR is that scalable organization. It's evergreen. There's no LPs. And it's a model like 20 employees. Like, we're building a lot of stuff that is useful for founders. We ask every year we ask ourselves, like, what's the most useful thing we can do to support founders? And the current hypothesis we have is like talent, money, distribution, right? So if we bring people their first 5 hires and they're better than anyone they can find themselves, if we help raise capital, like after the grand pitch that we do, like people raise around twice as much than after YC demo day. And that's the average metric. And the third one is distribution, right? We bring you customers. And we can't do that for every single deep tech companies, but there's quite a lot of companies for whom we can do that. And that's the value prop. And like every year we build new stuff, tech stuff sometimes. For example, putting the 35,000 applicants we get into a vector database, scraping like all sorts of information, making it queryable. So if you need to hire a person who's coded more than 10,000 lines of code in C++, I can find that person for you with one query very easily, right? And that's what we do, and we're just building stuff that founders love and makes their life even easier, and therefore hopefully also attracts the best people, who can build incredible companies that can go far beyond 1 billion. And we run this like a venture. We track OKRs like every week, every quarter, and we're executing. We're doing this simultaneously to our founders. They should feel that we're not there to just invest, we're there to build alongside them. And also when we invest, we're like a co-founder. We join negotiations, we join customer calls. Like if I need to do a code review until 4 a.m. in the morning because there's like a big issue, I will do that. Like whatever it is, like we're hustling.
Are you guys but you're your venture fund, you take equity in the company, you give them an investment. Are they all European companies that you're focused on? Is that sort of the main focus?
It's the main focus. Around 70% of the companies we back are Europe-based. There's a bunch of people we've backed in San Francisco, MIT, Harvard, and so Boston area is also big for us. Especially weird stuff like we financed the nuclear test reactor and underwater flywheels and stuff like this. We don't shy away from hardware. I do the math part. My co-founder Paul does the physics part. He studied nuclear physics actually, and then built a Just, scaled it to 1.2 billion and sold it. So like we're not afraid to look at like complicated business models, complicated technologies, even hardware if necessary. We do that all over the world, but we have our roots in Europe, so that's where most people come from.
So with that said, like obviously you are someone who has clear experience in starting really successful companies, recruiting amazing people, right? Now it sounds like you literally recruited the top of the top people to go build a company with you. And now you backed a bunch of people through Sigma Squared and are now doing the same thing at EWOR. So to kind of kick things off, I like to really ask a key question to everybody, which is, how do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, what does that mean to you as someone who's been that excellent entrepreneur and clearly invested in a bunch of other entrepreneurs? How do you define that term?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would define it as the steepness of the delta of your learning curve, right? So basically, if you look at your insight now and your insight a month from now, whether you're in customer discovery, you're figuring something out, or whether you're prototyping, you're testing how people react to the product, or whether you're already live, you're developing new features, you're learning something in the next month, right? And that learning informs your next set of actions. And that next set of actions needs to be more effective than the previous set of actions. Because if you're not doing this, you clearly wasting opportunity cost massively. And people who have the steepest curve in this delta, who just take the new set of learnings and do this, implement it, have the execution ability to do that, because it's not just the intellectual mechanism. I know a couple of people who intellectually get all of this, but they can't execute it. You need to be able to grasp it, and you need to be able to deliver. And if you can do those two things, I would say that is entrepreneurial excellence to me.
That's a great definition. I love that. Sort of the steepness of your learning curve, which implies the execution piece as well, because you can't really have a steep learning curve if you're not able to execute on it each new month or each new week or each new day. So I want to ask about execution, but let's get to that in a second. Before we do, related to this sort of steepness in the learning curve, why do people in many cases have so much trouble with learning? So I think everyone listening to this podcast is going to think they are someone who is potentially an excellent entrepreneur and has a steep learning curve already. Yet I found that actually to be incredibly rare, even for people who are entrepreneurs. In other words, like, well, that's one question. Then second one is like, how do you identify that, right? Are you talking with people over 2, 4, 5, 6 months and you're tracking, you remember, I spoke with Adam in January, and in, July, I speak with him again, and suddenly he is so much smarter. Like, how are you identifying the founders who can be excellent and have that steep learning curve?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, there's no learning without feedback, right? Like it's in learning science, in machine learning, if you don't have a labeled data set, it's really hard to train your algorithm, right? And you can do unsupervised learning, but that has some sort of feedback as well. So if there's no feedback, you don't learn. And I think most people simply, they don't have a feedback cycle implemented. They're just doing stuff, but they're not looking at the data that is generated by them doing stuff, which is the feedback mechanism. And if you are not getting that this is like crucial data to consider in order to iterate your next set of actions, then I think you're not learning anything. And I actually do see that in quite a couple of people out there who just executed as like, oh, founders fail fast. Yeah, failing fast is good if it generates learning fast, but I actually don't like the term failure culture. I hear it a lot in Europe. It's like, oh, we need to be more daring. We need to be more like America. We need to dare more. And I think that is correct, but I think it's not a failure culture we need. I think it's a learning culture we need. We shouldn't be afraid of failure that triggers learning. And some failure, though, is irreversible, and irreversible decisions shouldn't be decisions you do lightly and where you just fail fast, and you should have enough nuance in your decision-making framework to do that. So that would be my first point on learning and what gets founders to learn. And secondly, I think most people don't make enough time for reflection. I do a micro reflection every single day. I notice that especially behavior is something that you typically needs a feedback mechanism that is daily. So if I, for example, my communication on Slack is shit, like I use a lot of exclamation marks, very aggressive, very blunt. It's like, it's not good. It's horrible actually. And my coach tells me that every time my employees tell me, everyone tells me, and I noticed like it's just not changing, right? And like what I did every single day is think about how's my communication? What did I write? Did I take enough time to look at my Slack messages, reread them, and see if it's actually correct what I'm doing there? And if my answer was no, then I said, okay, what can I do next day in order to change this? And that finally got me to change it. I say I'm still not perfect at this, but I'm way better than I was 2 years ago. And that's a daily feedback mechanism that you need. You can't do that on a weekly basis. But then there's weekly reflection. I do that, for example, looking at my time. I look at where did my time go this week? I'm a rigorous time tracker. And I would look at, was this OKR relevant time? Was this non-OKR relevant time? And if I spend 50% of my time on something that's absolutely non-OKR relevant, I'm asking myself, well, what was I doing all week? And do I really need to do this again? And either I come to the conclusion that the OKRs are defined wrongly, because sometimes you have a bad definition of your OKRs, which is driving the value of the organization. And you realize, oh shit, I did these things because I intuitively get that they are useful. And I should be continue doing them, but I need to redefine my OKRs. But sometimes the reflector is also, oh my God, like I've just done irrational stuff because I'm a human, I'm an irrational being. But those reflection loops every week help me to be less irrational, more rational, do the right things, and then spend 80-90% of my time on OKRs, which I think is a perfect kind of range.
So how do you, just talking about time management, how do you identify where you're spending your time? Like, do you have it tagged in your calendar and then it auto generates a report, or you're using a tool for it? Like, just being very specific. Like, how do you do that? I've done this before myself, but I had my EA kind of go through all my meetings and basically write down what it was. And that was a very manual way of doing it, of course. But how do you do this?
Mine is even more manual because I just didn't find an automated way to do it. And I do lots of automation, especially in the multi-agentic world we live in right now. Yeah. It's fantastic. But this is something I haven't managed to automate yet, because getting from meeting, like which category I want this meeting to classify as is just too difficult. So what I do, I realized it takes me 5 minutes every day. I just go through my day, typically at noon in the evening. And I think that I talked to a lot of founders about this, and they're like, oh, like I'm just way too inconsistent. Of course, like the first thing you got to get used to is to use a checklist every noon and evening. If you're not able to do this, it doesn't work.
Use a checklist for what? Sorry, use a checklist to do what?
For all sorts of things. I can go into my checklist in a second, but one of the items is go through my calendar and label in half an hour slot.
So it's one of your tasks. You just go through and label it every day.
And it costs me 10 minutes every day to do this labeling. So I've thought about it a million times. Like, is it 10 minutes, cumulatively speaking, like over the next 30 years? It's a lot of time.
Right.
Yes. And I concluded I need it. I've tried with it, without it. I concluded the net positive of doing this is absolutely there.
You're categorizing that. I do think there's some ways you can probably do that. I think use Calendly or things like that. And you can probably start. I bet Calendly has exports of data that you can check out and see how many meetings are scheduled. And actually, I wonder if my calendar does it too, now that I should really look into that too.
Okay. The question is, which categories do you use, right? Like, do you say, oh, this is an internal, external call? Then it's easy because you're just saying, does this email address exist in my company directory or not, right? But those are not the categories I'm using. I'm looking at okay, what am I doing there specifically, right? Is this a fundraising call? Is it a And then looking at this, you just have to be a little bit manual about it, right? You're from the scraping, you can get a little bit, but doing those quick tips.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're going from learning. So you're learning all these things from a calendar and other things. We should talk about checklists and how you manage your time too, that we definitely want to talk about that. But I'm going back to learning. Okay, great. You've learned I'm spending my time in too many internal calls or something. How do you change that? And then how does that reinforce what you do? And how do you know you're getting better, right? We all are positive. So you probably believe you are a better version of Daniel than you were a year ago. But how do you actually know that that's true? Every founder has this over optimism and positive image of themselves that's slightly insane because you have to be an entrepreneur. So how do you actually know you are being better in learning?
It's a great question, because I think most people look at it exactly the wrong way. They look at external metrics did I get funding? Did I, onboard incredible people? And I think those are exactly the wrong metrics to look at, because first of all, you don't know how much higher they could have been. Secondly, they are most of the time effects of stuff you have done 3-4 years ago. And the lag is just absolutely massive.
It's a great point. It's so true. It is a huge time lag.
Absolutely, right? So those are not the metrics you can use. So for example, time is very simple, right? I say, okay, those 5 things are relevant activities. I want to spend 80% of my time there. I track it and I see, do I get close to the 80% or do I not, right? Like, and then when I see, okay, it's 80, I experiment. Can I get to 90? I, for myself, concluded that anything between 80 and 90 is fine. Then I
on OKR activities, 80 to 90% of your time should be spent on OKR related activities. So just to make it concrete, like let's pretend for myself, one of our OKRs is to grow revenue for my company, Chore. I still we have a sales guy, but I still should be on a certain number of sales, partnership calls, things like that generate leads. So that probably means I should spend 50% of my time on external calls related to sales, if that's one of the key goals. So it's just, okay, I see your point then. And then what falls out of that list of what's not OKRable, but still valuable? Because you could say, well, my internal meeting with my teammate on this project, and one of my OKRs was to make sure this project became a reality by the end of the quarter. And it's everything might fall in that bucket.
Exactly. And that's the question of how great is the quality of the OKRs you define, right? And that's a question I don't ask myself every week. I ask myself every quarter. I look at the OKRs. I think, how well do those reflect where I truly need to go? I actually don't do yearly planning anymore. I think we live in a chaos theoretical time.
Fun debate. Okay, keep going. Why don't you do yearly planning?
Because quarterly planning is all I need. And then once I've done 2 quarters, I've learned so much that I can plan the next quarter already better than if I had done a yearly plan. What you can do is you can do a yearly plan and adjust it every quarter. But I figured it's enough for me to actually just plan every quarter, give it my absolute best, map the metrics, and then use the insight from that quarter to plan the next quarter. And so this is typically how we operate, and it works really well for us. And then we, of course, reflect, and we would go a level deeper. And that gets me to a really interesting point. And that point is, does my set of activities that drive OKRs still reflect the most effective way? And that's where you might realize, oh, now I shouldn't spend my time on 50% outbound sales calls. I should spend my time on hiring the right people who can do it just as effectively as I can and coaching them, right? And you might conclude that, you might do it for a quarter, and you might see, oh shit, it's way too early. No, it's founder-led sales. There's no way around it. I need to do it. You go back, right? I have multiple situations where at the end of the quarter, I do a reflection, I make a conclusion, and next quarter, I know that conclusion was wrong. As long as most of my conclusions are right, and as long as I keep the things that are right and disregard the things that are wrong by realizing they were, I'm super fine with that system. So I see this as the framework I use is exploration-exploitation trade-offs. I try to explore enough every quarter, try new things just to learn more, but then I also want to understand what are the main drivers and I want to exploit them. And that's where that 80% metric goes, right? 80% you want to exploit, you want to do the things that work. And then you want to have that reflection loop, and 20% is still exploring, gathering.
Okay, so almost that's one of your KPIs or OKRs is I'm going to do 20% exploration on new ideas, learn from new people, things like that.
Almost, yeah. We don't call it OKRs, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you, so it's funny bringing up OKRs. I had a conversation with another great founder yesterday who also was really harping on the quality of OKRs and how important they were. I've done various versions of OKRs at my companies over the years, and I've never found a way to really make them stick because they somehow get very quick. Even at big companies, where you talk to people at Google, oh my God, the OKR process is this really long thing. No one pays any attention until the end of the quarter, and then everyone scrambles to basically make something up. How have you made them work for you today, but also for your other startups? What do you do to write it down in a spreadsheet? Do you use software? How do you make them high quality enough, but also detailed enough that people will follow them? Walk us through the process to why these are really good and why they're important and why you made them work when plenty of other people, sounds like I know a lot of people have made them fail, including myself.
Yeah. And so have I, right? I think there's 2 important questions to ask. First one, how? Second one, when, right? And I think pre-product market fit, it's incredibly tough to work with OKRs because the main process you're in is mostly explorative. And at least in the framework I use, it's an altered OKR framework. I don't use the kind of measure what matters full on way. We iterated this. So first of all, some definitions. To us, we mostly use key results. So we look at the metrics that drive the value of the organization every single quarter. And for example, the number of applications. I will go into why this is a bad and a good metric in a second. But that metric needs to be there every single quarter. Like I can't say like, oh, this quarter, this metric is relevant. Next one, it isn't. The key results we track are only the ones that replicate every single quarter.
Interesting.
Otherwise, it's a project. Is, for example, doing a new website, it drives applications. Yes, it can optimize conversion, but conversion is the metric I track. Building the new website is a project because it is non-repetitive. It's like a one-time thing. And a couple of things we do are projects.
So isn't that then flipped around? Like, at least that's my understanding. Like the objective then would be, we want more applications, and one key result might be, I guess, I mean, it feels like you're flipping the two around than what's standard.
The main key result is like number of applications. And then there's a couple of key results that relate to input metrics that are a little bit less output driven. Like, for example, the number of promo partners, the number of venture scouts, and so on. And then we would look at projects that could drive those that are non-repetitive, because there's two things driving OKRs according to our definitions: that processes and projects. Processes are the action sets that replicate every week. For example, onboarding new high-quality promo partners is something, and promo partners for us are organizations that help us spread the word, that are excited about what we do, and that want to like help make their members aware of like what we do at EWOR. We've realized this is much more effective than just going out there on LinkedIn and doing a post. We really want to meet the organizations that are already hyper selective about whom they let in, and those are the people we want to speak with, and we want to spend more time with them rather than doing something generic out there on social media. So this is every week we do the same set of activities to find more, to like work with more, to deliver our promises to them. We're obviously creating a lot of value because it needs to be a win-win situation. So that is a process. Building a new website would be a project. That wouldn't be a process, because we wouldn't do it every week. We wouldn't do it in the same way. You don't have replicability. So the way we look at it is we define a bunch of key results that drive the value. Then we define the set of processes and projects that drive those key results. And then we question those every single quarter and see, can we come up with better stuff? And some of the stuff we try out, it doesn't work. Some of the stuff we try, it works, and we do it again and again and again. For example, promo partners, we realized, oh, this is great. So we just hired a new person because it's a scalable process, and two people can do it just twice as good as one person. And then there's other stuff that is not as scalable, which we have as a metric for every process as well, because some of the things you can do, like, for example, SEO, but if you have one more person in the team, you're not going to get twice the results, right? So the question is really like, how scalable is the process?
So, how much do you break this down within? Well, first of all, how much time do you spend as an executive team creating these every quarter? And then how much time do you spend reviewing them? And then do they break down all the way to the team? Like, individuals also have their own OKRs. Are you doing full waterfall of this?
Great questions. So first of all, we have 4 main areas which have like a set of key results. So typically like one objective, a couple of key results. Those are, I don't want to go into, so 4 main areas. There's one person in the leadership team being solely responsible for that one area. And this is the person who does the review of the OKR every quarter. It's typically a 2-hour call. We look at tons of data and analytics.
2-hour once a quarter.
Yes.
Exactly. So that's super heavy. Okay.
Yeah. And it takes me, of course, a little bit more time because I need to prepare. I typically look at this presentation up front, then I ask some questions, and then the presentation gets iterated, and then we have the final presentation, which is typically not like, oh, I present my numbers, because I personally think in a kind of post-COVID world, it's like absolute waste of time. Like, you can send Loom videos, people watch it up front, and then we discuss, because that's where we need everyone. And people handle it differently. Some people do it one-on-one with me, and some bring the entire team. People are responsible in the team for processes and projects, but the key results are the same. So they don't get any additional key results or something. Like 5 key results for, we call it attraction. It's basically generating applications.
Okay.
And those 5 don't change. And if you have more team members, there's possibly more people working towards achieving those numbers, but they're the same numbers. And everyone, of course, knows what those numbers are, knows our performance, because every single week we look at them. And we see, did we make progress or did we not make progress? And I think that's the problem with most OKR processes, because metrics are defined that simply don't go up every week, because either they define too output heavy. If they're too output heavy, it typically takes longer to generate that eventual output. And then like you can't review it every week, nothing happens, or they're incredibly input heavy and like people don't even review them because it doesn't make any sense. So you need the right balance. It needs to be somewhat blurry, hard to get there, but it needs to be possible to generate some like higher number every single week. And if you find that sweet spot, then it works incredibly well. And this is also what we teach our founders, and this is how I run my organization.
Do performance reviews based on the OKRs, and how often do you do performance reviews with the team?
Yeah, I don't look at performance in terms of OKRs like at all. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes you can do to do this, because first of all, if you do that, it gets really political. People try to negotiate low OKRs in order to overshoot them and get a great performance review. And secondly, you create a culture of fear. People like, oh, if you don't reach those numbers, like Daniel's gonna be angry and he might fire me and my performance is not good. And that's really what we don't want. We just want to see people try their very best. And we've had celebrations with a team where we reached 60% because we were like, this was a phenomenal input. And we've learned why we couldn't achieve that output, but everyone has done a phenomenal job here. And we've had 110% OKR achievements at some quarters where we're like, still doesn't feel right. Like we have 100, we believe we could have done more. Let's do more next quarter. So it's a good framework. And the more we learn, the closer we get to kind of 80 to 100%. And what I just explained was more of a situation like 2 years ago. But especially when things are a little bit more blurry and you haven't yet set the perfect OKRs, doing performance reviews based on it is very difficult. Later on, the organization gets more stable. You can like forecast and plan those a little bit better, but we don't do performance review based on those.
So I buy the reasons why you don't want to have performance reviews tied to OKRs. At the same time, like there would be a really good argument that incentives are really nicely aligned if you tie performance reviews to the OKR. Like if the OKR is the main objective for an individual or the team or company, shouldn't people's performance be tied somewhat to that, right? I mean, like if you, maybe said differently, if my OKR is achieve X% in new sales or something, because that's what we want to grow the company, or in your case, new applications, right? But yet I did a ton of work totally unrelated to that over the quarter. Wouldn't you say like, you're not actually doing work towards the OKR, you're not achieving it. So it's things are misaligned. And I think aligned incentives are one of the most powerful things companies can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also why we do OKRs, right? This is an alignment question. Do we all understand the metrics that matter most? And do we all spend enough time on driving those metrics? Personally, I would say time spent on OKR relevant activities is a good metric to look at. And as you say, if someone would not spend any time on OKRs relevant stuff, we would have an intervention, and that would be a negative performance review. However, I think the height really is a problem. Like you can't say, oh, you've reached X% only, because then the political thing that I've mentioned earlier happens, right? Where people try to like set those low OKRs and overshoot them and get really scared of setting high ones because they know they're going to get a bad performance review if they're not high enough. That is where you need to be wary. So I wouldn't say like at the end of the quarter, like, oh, you've reached your OKRs, you're great, or you haven't, you're not great. I would look deeper. I would look at like, do you embody the right set of activities in order to drive the numbers? And as long as you go one level deeper and you do a performance review about this, then I think it's fine. But I wouldn't go on the high level and see.
How often do you do performance reviews? Is it annual, quarterly, monthly?
Yeah, I actually moved away from doing regular performance reviews, as in like every quarter, every year, because first of all, there's a bonus question, right? Like, do you get a bonus now or like some additional visa or whatever? And secondly, it's a feedback question, right? And learning needs feedback. And we just went to, whenever something happens, we immediately get on the phone, get on a call and talk about it. And that philosophy for me, like it was a game changer. So it's not like, oh, it's been a quarter, now we look back together. Of course, we do a reflection every quarter. It's like, do the things we do as a company make sense? But on a personal level, whenever something happens that isn't serving us, we jump on a Zoom call and we talk it through and we try to do more things that serve us. So with some people, I do have performance reviews like 8-9 times a year, like almost every month. And with others, I do it like once every half year because they're incredibly good at what they're doing. And there's like nothing that needs to be discussed.
How many people are at EWOR now?
At EWOR, 25.
Okay, so 25. So you're sort of a small in business. How many people were at the last company? Your last company?
Sigma 200, you now 50. When I left, now more, of course. Yeah.
Does that scale? So part of what I asked, I hear your point about like, hey, like we should only do a performance check-in or a check-in like when something big is changing.
Yeah.
As a manager, that's really hard to put in place because you might not always know what's changing, right? So as an example, the way we have things set up at Chore, our managers don't know the day-to-day of their teammates, almost on purpose. We don't want them to be wasting time like just overseeing somebody and paying attention to what they're doing. We assume someone's a professional. So they don't know naturally what's changing. So we actually do monthly performance check-ins, and we feel like that's a process that's important to get that in place and have that continuous feedback loop. But I'm not sure. I mean, I like your idea of doing it less or only when it's relevant, but then I could easily see that becoming, well, it just doesn't happen because managers don't know necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. That's a culture question, right? In the end, and the coaching question. So personally, how I would look at it, first of all, a couple of the things I'm saying, right? Like, of course, like uniquely tied, like to the kind of organization EWOR is, right? And we really believe we can scale this beyond like $1 billion in value, like with less than 30 people. So like this is a very unique form like of organization, and it's absolutely run differently to like how you would run like a typical B2B SaaS venture. I think there's lots of parallels, like most of what I said applies, but it of course applies in certain circumstances. And what I would say in order to like look at what you just said in a differentiated way, I would say if you have the time to coach up the people in the leadership and the managers and so on, of the organization, if you have time to like check in with them about these, performance reviews, and if they care deeply enough and you can do the right hires, then I would say it still works that way. But personally, if I was growing a SaaS company that adds 20 people to the payroll every quarter, then I would not do it. I would do monthly performance reviews because I simply don't have enough time to coach up people in order to do this the way I just described to you, right? So it's really a question of like, what are your internal resources? Like, can you deliver on this? And most of the time, in fast growing SaaS land, you can't. And then it's totally fine to install a little bit more structure, which would also be my recommendation.
Okay. So that makes me feel a little bit better about how we're doing it. Although I think part of the question too I'd ask is like, let's pretend, so, okay, you're a multi-time founder with a lot of success. So you kind of know how to coach. A lot of founders I work with and talk to and people listening to this are first-time founders. They might have never even managed before. And suddenly, they get many millions of dollars from a VC that says, okay, go build a company. And they're like, I've never managed one person in my entire life. And now I'm supposed to go build a company and train, hire, manage, put all these processes in place. Are there any heuristics that you use to help them do this the right way? Because like, it sounds great, go coach, but like, come on, most of the people have no idea how to coach because they've never tasted success like you have. They don't know what good looks like beyond like, they might be world-class at like one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things you need to look at, like the known unknowns. And I think that's really a question of your reflection cycles. And I'm really invite all sorts of like first-time founders when we invest. If you do around 60% serial entrepreneurs these days. So 60% of the founders we invest in, they've had 8-9 figure exits before. They could fund like their pre-seed personally. And they choose to do this with EWOR because of like the difference in talent distribution and money, right?
And just sort of pause there for a second. I assume it's partially because your data shows multi-time founders have a higher exit potential in their next company. Like it sort of compounds, right? The learning compounds. So it helps you have a better exit if there's someone who's done it before.
Exactly, it does help. It's really interesting. The data is not perfectly clear on this. Like most unicorn founders actually have had a 10 to 40 million exits. This is kind of exactly in that they've had this little exit. They're still hungry. They want to go. But they have money. They have resources. They've had learning. But you see, like also, of course, a lot of crazy companies like Amazon, you see like Facebook, and so on, like driven by a first-time founder. I think it's for us, yeah, it's 60-40, but we'd always fund a great first-time founder, but they need to be willing and ready for like a crazy journey. And truth is, most first-time founders are not. They have absolutely no clue how goddamn hard entrepreneurship is. And then they get going, and after burning 3 or 4 million, they decide, oh, this is too hard for me. I want to do something else. And we want to look for people who are willing to endure all of the hardship and are ready for this, right? And that is exactly where we also do a lot of coaching. And the first thing is, what are the reflection cycles, right? Like how often do you reflect about your known unknowns so that you can understand, oh, I don't know this. I need to get better. I need to learn coaching. But then you need one person, like me, for example, or Paul. I mean, the team at EWOR, right? Like Peter, Bill sum up 8 billion, Paul adjust 1.2 billion exits, Alex Proglo 500 million exits. All of those people, they have done like really big companies, and they can look at like your weekly progress, and they can also say, this is an unknown. You don't know you suck at this, but like I'm here to tell you right now, you desperately suck at this certain thing. And I'm sorry, but me telling you right now might be the best thing you've ever heard. It might be hurtful right now, but you need to hear this. And we only do this once we're really sure. But I think it's one of the most useful things we do for first-time founders. It's not the talent. It's not the money. It's those situations where we're like, look, this is where you need to change. And I think that really triggers coaching, and it invites people to learn something they need to learn now. And if you've never hired before, the first thing you need to learn is hiring, right? You got to prioritize. So don't do coaching before.
I want to talk about hiring too, but before we get to there for just a quick second, because as you're describing what you are and how you guys work, it sounds awesome. At the same time, how do you make it scalable, right? If you're adding, I don't know how many new companies you're adding every single year that you're investing in, but at some point it gets to be some number that you can't, you have companies from 5 years ago that you invested in, and now you have dozens and dozens of new ones. And how do you have time for any of them? You and your 4 co-founders are amazing, but you tap out at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, great expectation management, right? So we need to say, look, for the next 18 months, we're here for you. You can do the EWOR modules, whether you need talent, personal development,
you got to cut them off, quasi cut them off at 18 months. You're like, okay, we'll still give you help, but like, don't expect as much. Like,
I'm always, if someone calls and someone needs help, I'm always there. Like, no, like morally, I will rather stop EWOR from growing than not being there for like the fun.
I love that. It's just like, it's a product first mentality of like delight for your customers in a sense. I mean, it's what you're describing.
If Wayne needs you, I'm going to be there. But of course, the expectations management it's going to be massive, hands-on, as in like I've built decks for founders. Like there's a person who's raised an incredible round. Like the deck, like they weren't great at building decks. I said that's absolutely non-essential skill. Maybe 10 years ago I would have said something different, but I said like 2024, like when back in the day was 2024, I was looking at this person's company, incredibly strong technically. I said, look, I built your deck. And then they had the round and they got tons of term sheets, and we were on the phone every single day. And that's kind of the expectations management. It's like, this is what we're going to do for you for the next 18 months. But then afterwards, like we're going to be more like an ordinary investor. And if you need something, you grab the phone and you give us a call. And if you don't, you don't. And that's, first of all, the setup. Secondly, the question of scale is really interesting, because so far I've really built things. You have 2 processes really driving the value of the organization: better product, more sales. And now I'm building something way more complicated than that. And the question is really, how do you set it up, right? And we've really formulated this as a mathematical optimization problem. In 2050, there's going to be 150 to $300 trillion companies. That's our estimation. Our question is, let's find as many of those as possible. And then the question is, how do you do it? Do you do it like YC and do 400 companies a year, and that triggers adverse selection, and we don't think that's the right approach? Do you do 1 company a year? Like, expecting that your selection is so great that you can always find like the company with the highest chance, you would only one company a year, right? Like, but the reality is somewhere in the middle. And our answer has been like 35, 40 companies a year. And we believe that until 2050, we will have found at least $1 trillion company.
Still, it's a lot to deal with on a regular basis. And different discussion about whether any companies will exist with AI in the pace of AI and in whether even VCs of any sort can actually invest properly in that. But that's still an impressive growth rate. Okay, let's talk about hiring. How do you hire great people for EWOR, all of your companies? What advice do you give to your founders who you obviously are investing in because you think they are excellent and have a chance to build a $1 trillion company?
So first of all, I would say there's a couple of steps in hiring, right? The first thing is, how do you really fill your funnel? To most people, that means I go on LinkedIn and I do a job post and then I brag about how 500 people applied who all should. That's not how it works. And I think most people, they already need to optimize how do they fill the funnel. And like, there's so many creative ways. The first thing is really, start network, go out, like meet people for dinner, like ask them smart questions, get to know them over a long time. The second thing is advisors. We've just brought on a person who scaled a company to 100 million ARR, then built a second company, raised over 20 million, just joined the team last week. He's been an advisor. Your advisor network is he's been an investor, he's been an advisor, backed like tons of portfolio companies. And the reason they joined is because they've watched our execution like every single week. And
I mean, that we'll take a tangent on advisors then for a second. How do you manage advisors well? Do you give them equity? One of my challenges with advisors is they almost can feel like overhead and just like another person to manage if you don't do it right. And it's like, okay, well, then what? You got this advisor who you're more training up. You're trying to like, hey, check out what we're doing and how we're doing it. And you don't know how to ask them the right questions. How do you manage this advisor the right way to the point where it wasn't overhead or a burden for you, but actually value add? And you're like, oh, actually, I want you to come on board full time.
Yeah. Great point. I think a lot of founders, like they had like 20 advisors. And
yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, look at my big advisor list of your pitch deck. I'm like, dude, I don't care at all. It sounds like you wasted a ton of time on all these advisors who you talked to once. And like, great, they think you're smart, so they're going to put their name on your deck. But I don't care. Like, what have you actually executed on?
Yeah, exactly. You need to be super, super careful with whom to onboard as an advisor, especially if you give away equity. Like, typically, I don't give away equity. That's always been my model. Like at EWOR, I started changing this. So I gave 0.1% to 3 people. And I'm really glad I did, because all of those 3 people are like absolutely exceptional. But this has been like process of like getting to know those people over 3 years and knowing like they're really good, they care about what we're doing, they're putting in the time, and they're driving OKRs, right? They need to be driving OKRs. Otherwise, it's again an alignment question. Like they might be actually wasting the time of your team rather than providing any value. And I think a great thing to look at that most people disregard is saving CEO time. If there's an advisor, for example, that can, I'm going to give a really stupid example, but that's actually true. Around a year ago, the LinkedIn post, I needed to look at every single LinkedIn post because there's no one who kind of had the feeling on like, hey, this is the kind of wording we use. And in the organization, like the guy running this was like incredibly quantitative and like so good at all of the quant stuff, but like not really great at like brand, language, and so on. And I wasn't great at that either, but I at least was better. And I at least really understood the target group. So I could look at text and be like, is this appealing to our target group? And most of the time I concluded it isn't. It took me a lot of time to rewrite posts. And we then found an advisor who could do this for us. And that was just so much additional time saved. And it typically it's not that simple.
So for you, the advisor isn't as much of like an advisor per se, someone who's like really good at something area that you need help with, and they're almost like an employee, but like part-time is what you're describing. Like this advisor came on and essentially helped write LinkedIn posts for you guys.
Yeah, like advisor came on, read through all of the posts, and like just was the person doing the final decision of whether they posted or not. And like I didn't have to lose any headspace on like deciding, oh, we can post here and we need a delay, blah blah blah. It was just so much headspace. It was LinkedIn was very stupid. I never had a company before, but first of all, they were as relevant so that I would care as much about it. But back then, we got a lot of applications from LinkedIn. And secondly, there was always like some social media department. There was one full-time person like figuring the stuff out. And now, like it wasn't that way, and it was taking my headspace, and like that, they're having an advisor actually help, right? So this is one of the frameworks you can use. There's, of course, like way more important stuff. For example, generating leads. I think this is where advisors, like for most SaaS companies, can be incredibly useful. Those kind of sales advisors, you can also incentivize via commission, doesn't have to be equity. But if there's a great person who can just pre-vet leads, who also already has those leads in their network, then I think it's absolutely advisable to onboard them, because the time you need to identify those leads, to like get them ready to make a buying decision, can take ages. And that's all.
So I want to maybe redefine sort of how you're defining advisors for people. Tell me if this is a correct definition. Basically, an advisor to you is someone who can essentially do a very specific task at a really high level, and you almost set up metrics for them to achieve it, right? So is that sort of correct? You're like, because some people bring on an advisor and they don't really do anything. They're just like a name on a deck. Like you're saying, no, an advisor should come in, take on a specific task that they will do better than you as a CEO, and you don't need to give them a lot of oversight to achieve it.
Yeah. I would even go broader. Like the definition I've just used for me right now is like anyone in the company who would possibly get equity or the title, who's not full-time and doing something of relevance, whether that's giving advice, whether that's like driving, like whatever, like not employee, but also not investor, right? Like some umbrella term to like.
Yeah. Well, advisor's good. People like it. It sounds sexy. So it's sort of an easy, cheap title to give them to. Do you then put them on a bit of like is there a very specific like outcomes? Like, hey, you're on a vesting schedule, and maybe it starts, there's no cliff, let's say, but you start vesting immediately, but you need to hit X number of milestones to continue to remain an advisor with vesting for us. Is that like what you do? Like a true, like almost contractor?
Yeah. The vesting I use for advisors is there is a cliff, there is a strike price, and they own, like after 12 months or 18 months, typically they start earning their first shares. So if a period of experimentation where you can figure things out. And if they're not willing to experiment with us, and if they're not willing to take a risk about like, hey, I might invest 6 months and 0 comes out, then we're not willing to take the risk either, because it might also take a lot of our time. And it's not necessarily something that will automatically offer a net positive, right? But for example, funded biotech companies, and they really need those advisors, and they need them now. So it's not like generic advice that will work for everyone. They need to not do a cliff and have those people like get massive shares quite early, just by giving them advice on something that would have taken them years to figure out. So in biotech, completely different story. It really depends on what kind of company you're building.
I love that mentality though. I remember speaking a long time ago, speaking to one of the early founders of Palantir, and he basically said the way they got all their early sales is they would hire these 4-star generals as advisors with very specific metrics. Like, you need to get us like deals or walk us into the DoD, Department of Defense, for this deal, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, some of them just didn't deliver, and we would just fire them, just straight up. Like, these are 4-star generals, like super top level. He's like, nope, they wouldn't deliver. We fired them as advisors. Just like, end of story. You didn't deliver on your promise. You're no longer an advisor, and that's just the way it was. They found some who were great and others didn't, and they just fired them.
Yeah, we've done the same thing. We've probably had 35 advisors that we disengaged that didn't even have equity, that didn't even have, like, all they had was the advisor title, right? And still taking team time and not delivering. It's net negative, as you say. It's costly, and you need to fire them. It's really important. Like, so everyone who's like, doing anything that distracts you from also.
So that's advisors. Talk me through hiring overall. So outside of advisors, how do you hire? What do you look for? How do you make sure you get the right people on the team?
Yes. So I do hiring typically purely based on like, there's two scenarios, right? First scenario is I meet someone absolutely incredible. They have a skill set that I just intuitively feel overlaps with like what the company needs doing. And I have the humility to assume I probably don't see all of the bottlenecks and they're going to figure like additional ones out. And I just want to have them as part of the team. Right. And this is exactly where you need vesting and you need to try things out. But I'm always explorative there. And if I meet a person who blows me away, I make an offer. Full stop. And I try it out. And I'm just super upfront about like, I know this is an experiment. You know, this is an experiment. We both know the cost of this are incredibly high. You're not doing something else. Like I'm not hiring anyone else. Like, let's go for it though. And then, and that's typically if I build a startup, like the first couple of hires are much more like this actually. And I was surprised most of the time actually figuring stuff out. However, if I would hire right now, it would be completely different. It would be a bottleneck analysis. I would say like, these are the channels that work really well to stay with the kind of attraction part because I've explained everything earlier. So let's say we're seeing, oh, we got like tons of applications from this channel. Like we need a person who can scale this channel. And then it's bottleneck driven, right? And from that, then I derive a skill set and a set of attitudes and do a job spec, right? And then I would run this by a lot of people and I would see like, is this job spec really describing the kind of people we need? And we try to be incredibly lean with that spec. We try to find like 3 or so non-negotiables on the skill side and the attitude side, never more than that. And then a couple of nice to haves, but even there I'm going more away from this. Like the must-haves are the really important stuff. And then I want the top 0.01% in that field, right? So if it's sales, I want to get a person who's and that's again, serial entrepreneurs, a first-time founder, you can't necessarily do that. Sometimes you can, depending on how hot your startup is. I certainly couldn't when I was building my first company, but now I can approach a person and can say, look, like we're those unicorn and decacorn founders running this company, and we need a top 0.01% person on the sales side. And if they can present empirical data that makes it clear, and this is then how I would run the hiring interviews. I would look for empirical data. This is how I would do the ref calls. I would validate that empirical data, the validity of that, by finding out, did they really do 0.1% like top, like sales performance? And if they did, great, then they're going to get an offer. And if there's zero evidence of it, we're not going to gamble. Like we want people who've like evidenced this in the past by things they did.
How do you make sure you're getting those top, I mean, some of those 0.01% people are not looking on LinkedIn for job roles. They're probably employed if they're that good. How are you finding them, or how are you spending time to go find and identify these people?
Yeah, I think it's really, again, how do you assess this funnel, right? How do you fill your funnel, and what are the activities you use to fill your funnel? And first of all, like those people might be advisors, right? They might be so incredibly good that you found them somewhere else. Secondly, I ask around. I still do this when I'm hiring. Like many of the strongest people I've hired, I've gotten like from warm intros just by talking to 5 to 15 super connectors that I know, and ask them, hey, like, do you know any incredible person? Like, I'm looking for like a person who's like an absolute superstar in XYZ, and you want to write me an intro. Here are the 3 must-haves, and can you write an intro? And like, I get surprisingly a lot of great hire still just from asking around. Of course, those people then also know that whenever they present a great person, like I do hire them, I make a great offer, super fair offer. They really enjoy working with me, and the next time they're way more willing to like write additional intros. So many of the things are also like flywheel effects, depending on like how well you manage this. And I think many of the founders that scale super fast these days are incredibly sharky. They're not acting so much trust-based. They fuck over like many people by like offering like weird like contractual shit that people don't read carefully. And that doesn't scale, right? So the next advice I'd give is really to just like do things that scale, fully trust-based, to always deliver on your promises, because that's in the end where you get that hockey stick effect. And thirdly, what I do a lot is I look at pre-filtered systems for Founders Associate. There's a thing in UK called Jumpstart UK. I think they're great. I'm not getting any money to endorse them or anything, but I found a couple of people that I hired through them, and they basically do something like a talent pitch. I show up there, I tell people what I'm hiring for, and they have filtered down 10,000 applicants to like the top 100, and the top 100 then watches, and the people who like my pitch, they reach out to me and they say, Danny, that was really cool. I want to work for your company. So
they're like a recruiting firm.
they're like a recruiting firm. They do it differently, but yeah, like let's call it recruiting firms. I would also work with headhunters. And then I would, of course, try to get employees to, like incentivize people to have to let their friends know. Because if you hire incredible people, they know other incredible people and they're going to write interest as well, right? And those were just 5 examples of like 25 things you can do to fill the funnel. And
you've written questions you like to hire, like ask, or just it's like different each time? Is there a methodology? How many interviews do you usually take people through? Like just you or many people on the team?
Yeah, at EWOR is now 7 interviews because it's an incredibly small team, and like the cost of hiring a person like that isn't a fit is incredibly low. I've had companies before where it's 1 interview and then a decision. But what I would now do is 7 interviews, like as many ref calls as necessary. I love the Sequoia framework there. They're basically saying do as many ref calls until you're not surprised anymore. So this is what I've taken and I've learned from them. So if I do 3 ref calls, I do a 4th one, and they still tell me tons of new shit. I'm like, okay, I need to keep going. But if there's a pattern after 2 calls, like, and people already tell me the same stuff, and then I do a 3rd one, it's again the same stuff, then I would stop at 3. And you ask a lot of questions like top 3, bottom 3 questions, right? So you wanna see, okay, is there overlap? And if you do 3 calls and there's 3 completely different strengths in every single call, you're just like, what the hell? Where's this coming from? It's also interesting that those people probably don't really know their strength, right? And therefore people struggle to describe their strength and so on and so forth. So you learn a lot from ref calls. And I would say I do value ref calls now over interviews because it's just more truthful and incredibly insightful. And really cool.
I assume the ref calls are some back channel calls and direct intros from the person. So like, are they all intros the person's made?
In Germany, it's only legal once there's an intro. So
okay,
of course I only do that.
Okay, got it. Right, got it. Okay, good. Fair enough. With a good smile on your face. So hypothetical that's really been bothering me. I'm kind of curious your take on this. So, I was talking with the founder recently. And the founder basically told me like they hire people, someone applies, and within 24 hours, they make an offer. Like literally application, they make an offer within 24 hours. I personally find that to be incredibly dangerous hiring, but I'm curious if your take, like this person thinks it's a real skill set that they have, that they can, from application to offer 24 hours because they move so freaking fast. They're a special company. I think it sounds utterly reckless and will come to bite them. But I mean, what's your take?
Yeah, as always, it depends, right? If I'm a company that mostly hires like blue collar workers that need to do like a certain like repetitive task, then it might be a really bold strategy because like you want to also market yourself to the employees. Like you need a lot of money fast. You want a quick check, a quick offer, and that like marketing statement, like, hey, like you get a decision from me in 24 hours might actually be great, right? And then there's of course an extreme example. The question is like, how certain can you be? And I would argue there are roles where I can do this in 24 hours and know whether they're a good fit or not. I would also say this is maybe like 1% of the hires I do. For the other 99%, I would personally not feel comfortable to make a decision in 24 hours. Personally, I've had a lot of like absolutely great people wait for me, like sometimes 2 weeks longer because I needed 2 weeks longer. And of course, I don't want to make people's life difficult, but it's neither in their favor, not in mine, nor in mine, then like making them a premature offer. And then it sucks for both them and us because like we've overseen something and then we need to fire them, right? Like firing is really costly stuff. Like that's what really costs money. The quality, like the hit rate in hiring you can get is so goddamn important, right? And sadly, we don't have the time, but the statistics on this is like by upping your hit rate 10%, this is a game changer. We're talking about like if you had 40 million ARR company, we're talking about millions saved by like just getting 10% better in terms of making the right hires, right? So personally, I would take more time, but it really depends on the role and how certain you can be in a certain amount of time and how well your processes are structured. If your company, your leadership team is mostly concerned with hiring, you can do 3-4 interviews in one day. You can have a discussion about that one day. You can do all of the ref calls in one day and do that in a high quality process. Go for it. I doubt that.
I doubt it too. I will say though, you're so right on the value and time of it. Like, so one of us for Chore, one of our goals actually for the team, so sort of quasi OKRs that we have, is actually around team turnover. So how long do we get people on board? How good are we at onboarding? How good are we getting them through the first sort of 2 or 3 months? It's really difficult for people in any new role. And how long do they stick around? And that also implies how good are we at hiring in the first place? Because like they have to have the right mentality to be a part of it. And so it's one of our goals because it is so costly and not well understood. The costs are not obviously like direct dollars, but they're so costly. So, okay, bouncing around from that, talk briefly about culture. What sort of culture do you like to set for your company and how do you make sure you have the right successful culture? And tie what you've done with other successful entrepreneurs, right? There's so many great ones out there in the world who built amazing companies, and some of them have utterly insane cultures that some people might hate, but you also build amazing things, right? Like there's some people who get pushed harder than they've ever been pushed before at the startups they're at and hate it, but also love it at the same time and say it's the best time in their lives. So what is a culture you create and how do you compare that to other entrepreneurial greats?
Yeah, I think that's the first important thing to note here, right? Like there's no perfect culture. It really depends on the context your business is embedded in. And the culture I'm now building at EWOR is like very different to the culture I've had before. Mm-hmm. Like there are certain sales roles where like what you said earlier, right? Like it needs to be like shorky and like everyone needs to put in 18 hours. Like what I'm building at EWOR hopefully stays for the next 30, 40 years. I want to build it with people who want to stay for the next 30, 40 years. One of our company values, like we have only 4 values. One of them is humor, because we want to get up and have fun and enjoy this for the next like 2 decades at least. And we want to do this with people we appreciate, we love to hang with, and like enjoy showing up and being on the call. And like sometimes we're a little bit less productive because we simply have fun together. That's absolutely okay. It's a super fast growing like SaaS startup with like an average churn of 3 years. That can be helpful, even like churn can be helpful in some instances. I wouldn't build a culture like this, right? So the culture needs to serve the company purpose.
And do you put that into your head before you start, or do you think still the company's culture, it's a reflection of you and where you are in life? Like the culture you might have built years ago is just because you were a different person then.
Yes, 100%. I mean, you change as a founder, right? So culture changes as well. But I think it's really important to have the culture reflect you and not some wishful picture of who you think you are. I think that's already where a lot of people get it wrong. They are not incredibly self-reflected and they think of them like, being someone incredibly, strong in certain areas where they're really not that strong. And then they build a culture around this. And this can be incredibly harmful. Like this, the next thing is they brainstorm a couple of values they believe would be useful for the company purpose, but none of their behavior reflects this, and it's not culture. Culture is a reflection of what people do every day, right? And like we're a pretty funny company, we joke around all of the time, and therefore we think humor is a great value, and we want to hire people like with a decent sense of humor and like who have fun around us and who enjoy. But it's a reflection of who we are already. It always needs to be a reflection, and that makes culture so difficult, right? Like it's first of all who you are, and secondly it's the company you aspire to be. And that's why first of all like founder market fit is so important. Like you can't just, I don't believe that every person could build like every company. Like I believe Jeff Bezos would have sucked at building Facebook. I believe Mark Zuckerberg would have sucked at building Amazon. It needs to reflect who you are. So the first thing in order for the culture to to serve your company purpose is you need to build a company which purpose you can actually fulfill by being who you are. I think that it starts all of the self-reflection, and I believe great founders invest a lot of time in self-reflection and understanding who they are and the kind of culture they can build.
Yeah. Do you ask about that when you're investing? Do you ask about self-reflection? Like, how do you deal with that how do you understand that someone's a self-reflective, thoughtful founder? Because everyone might say they are, but how do you?
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole set of attributes. You ask people about them, and they tell you a perfect story. They're incredibly good at communicating those attributes, but then you look at empirical data, and it's just not there, right? And I'm personally not willing to gamble, so I really want to see empirical evidence. It's the same thing for self-reflection. I really want to see, do people self-reflect? This is empirical evidence for this, and ref calls are way better way to find this out. But you can ask certain questions where people start telling you stories, and you see whether they learned something along the process or whether they didn't. And it also reflects in their language by listening to how people describe certain events. You see whether they tend to reflect on it, whether they deploy lots of like abstract thinking, or whether they don't, right? So that's a signal. And then there's a couple of really nice questions that I've again learned from Sequoia that can be helpful. Like one of the Sequoia questions is really like, so imagine, like there's a magic wand, and that could like magically give you like any attribute you want. Which one would it be? And typically what happens is people talk about the weaknesses, right? Like I'd love to be like better at public speaking. And, like if I had a magic wand, I'd made myself the best public speaker in the world. And then the next question is, okay, so what are you actually doing about it, right? Like, what are you doing to improve? And if they don't have anything, if they're not doing anything, it's very likely that they're not having a growth mindset, that they're not very self-reflected, because like they come up with it at the spot, but they're not acting on. It's not that they're actually improving. And that's a great question to find out, right? So, typically it's a set of smart questions where you implicitly ask for something while the other person like doesn't get what they're doing, right? Everyone who now listens to this podcast and gets this question from me knows what I'm on about, right? So I need to be aware of this, and of course have a set of questions that
if they've listened to it, then they should call it out and be like, I listened to this because I wanted to get. I love when people, and I interview people like, oh, I listened to a ton of your podcasts, and like I'm updated on things you're doing. Like I'm impressed. So I have to ask you then, if you could wave a magic wand and improve something about yourself, what would it be?
Yeah, I would definitely improve my Slack messages.
What are you doing every day to do that?
Yeah. I'm working with my coach, right? I'm doing those weekly reflections. Okay. But honestly, if I had a magic wand, it wouldn't be that. Like, I think there's a way bigger magnitude thing I could wish for that is doing that. And honestly, I think it would be consistency. So to give you a genuine answer, I was joking about, and I'm not great at Slack messages. I really need to improve there. But like many of the things I've mentioned to you, checklists like daily, weekly, quarterly reflections are a set of mechanisms I have introduced because I suck at that. I suck at consistency. My brain goes anywhere. Like I'm pure chaos by nature. That's why I love mathematics, because I could just like, once there was something to focus on, once I felt inspired, I could go on it for 12 hours. Otherwise, it was just like ADHD jumping around all the time. And that's still how I am. And with every Slack notification, it gets worse and worse. And the more people you hire, it gets worse and worse. So personally, I would love to just naturally be more consistent. And all of those things I have installed, they're helping, but they're not as good as things could be.
That could have, your answer leads us back to where I wanted to kind of go back to where we started, actually. We never really dug into what makes for great execution as a founder. What does great execution look like? And then learning culture, and how do you really keep that continuous learning feedback loop? And then also related to that, you talked a little bit about the European mentality around failure in like one thing, like how do you be willing to continue to learn? So anyway, so let's kind of go 1, 2, 3, like execution. How do you judge a great executor? What does that look like? In how do you judge for that? And how do you learn for that as a founder? How do you learn, okay, I can learn new ideas, but I need to execute on that on a regular basis?
It's an incredibly hard question. It's really hard to answer because execution is so different depending on the size of the organization. In the early days, you do everything yourself. And that's very easy. You just look at action bias. Does this person have an action bias? Do they get a lot of shit done, right? Do they ship a lot of code every week? Do they do a lot of customer calls every week? And do they do these kind of things? Then you're building a new kind of organization. You're kind of 10 people. You're somewhat of an executor, somewhat of a manager, right? And execution suddenly means not just how well do you get stuff done, but how well do you get people to get stuff done, right? So you're suddenly managing people who get stuff done. And it's no longer a function of you doing those things. It's a function of how well do you get those people to do those things. And that's way more difficult to watch, but I think it's still easy. You basically look at the people, you say like, what do you get done every week? And like, how's your, like CEO helping you to like get there? And then it gets really complicated because suddenly you are no longer in charge of managing people that do something. You're in charge of managing people that manage people that do something. And that is where like most founders fail. First of all, it's just empirically looking at my portfolio. Founders find this incredibly difficult, and typically you see a CEO replacement at this point in time. You would, like many founders, they first of all don't want it. They drop out. They say, admit defeat. I can't do this. I hate it. I don't want to do it because, frankly, they want to solve hard problems, and this is a hard problem, but a completely different kind of hard problem, right? It's like they're managing all of the time.
So the people they bring on board, are they just better at managing managers, essentially? Is that like a skill set they're better at
that point? Yeah, exactly. Like if you look at a typical like Sequoia funded company, Series B, new CEO steps in, what is that CEO great at? Exactly that phase, right? They're great at like bringing on board the right people, like strategic alignment, making people make people do stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is where they excel, and this is typically where founders don't excel at. But look at Zuckerberg, look at Elon Musk. There's so many examples.
Do the best ones, either the CEOs or founder CEOs or ones they bring in, are they just setting very clear metrics and deadlines and then following through? But like, you promised me X, you did not deliver X. What is the updated timeline? And if you do that 2 or 3 times and you miss it, you're out. Sort of quasi okay. The thing you said you don't do, but quasi OKR like settings. And if people don't do it, they're no longer there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the framework for this is they are very consistent on agreements. But the agreement rule I use is 99-1. So 90% of people like giving you like a certain yes to something, you expect them to deliver exactly this. 9% they renegotiate, right? Like the previous to the deadline, they're like, hey, I cannot deliver at this point in time. I'm incredibly sorry. This only happens 1 in 10 times, right? Roughly speaking. And you want to look at people's ratio. And for example, I use that as performance evaluation because I want to see people. Yes.
But it's okay to renegotiate, right? Sure, like it's okay. If you come in proactively saying like, hey, like here's all the reasons why I need to renegotiate this goal, it's okay. But not if you do it maybe on a consistent basis. If like every time you're like, I'm going to miss my goal, that's a problem.
Not all the time, right? Like especially if it's hyper essential stuff. I personally look at, so do they renegotiate stuff that is a distraction? As in, hey, I introduced you to this person because he's a friend of my brother and he really wanted to learn something from you. And it took them a while and maybe they didn't make it in the first week. And they said, oh, I'm going to do it next week. And they end up doing it like 3 months later. Who cares, right? Like this is, I would be super chill about this, but like they make a promise to something that's massively driving OKRs, right? And then there's suddenly like I need to renegotiate. Poof, yeah, like why? This is one of the most important things we're doing as a company. Have you not planned this correctly? And sometimes people have not, and they could not, and there simply wasn't enough data. And that's, I think, where a great CEO also differs from a merely good CEO. A great CEO wouldn't just enforce like any stupid shit someone agreed on. They look at this and they have a really good feeling of like, was this possible? And if it wasn't possible, like they're not mad, which I think most of startup founders I work with, they really take a lot of time to kind of develop this feeling because they want to appear as a strong leader, and then they're telling other people like, oh, you promised this and you didn't deliver. But if it was impossible to deliver this, you should be
right. Then that's a reflective moment. If you're setting impossible goals, then that's a leadership issue, not the team issue. So
exactly. And that happens all the time, right? Like we have this, like at the end of the quarter, we look at this metric and say, how the hell did we believe we could get there? We've learned so much more over the quarter trying to get there. It was impossible. And then I put this in the investor report and be like, guys, like we set this goal. I personally believe it's impossible. And anyone who wants to like shit about this, like give me a call. Like I'm responsible here. I set this. It was a bad goal. And I shouldn't have let anyone set this goal. So like you need to own this always as a founder. Like if you're the CEO of a company, I feel like whatever, like if you're reporting to investors or not, or like any other kind of shareholders, like you need to own those moments. It's typically not the problem of the employee. But sometimes it is, right? Yeah. Sometimes like they're really bad at goal setting. Yeah. And then you need to have a conversation about this, right? If people renegotiate 50% of the things, I'm like, guys, we really have a problem here with goal setting. And then for the 1%, so only 1% of breaking the agreement, 1 in 100 times. And it's like, I didn't have this in any previous company. And then I read this book, 15 Principles like Conscious Leadership. And like that guy claims it's possible. And I initially didn't believe it, but I now believe it is. Like if you really set this up well, only 1% of time people actually break the agreement. And then 9% they renegotiate, maybe it's 20%. And then 80% is just pure delivery. And I really noticed that the main thing driving this is saying no. You can't do this by saying yes to every single thing, right? Like you just don't get there. So what I'm thinking, especially right now, companies a little bit mature, like we're mostly driving value by focusing on the really essential things and saying no to the non-essential things. At the beginning of a startup, exploration is different. You need to say yes to all of the things. There's not a generic answer, but the phase we're at right now, most of the value is generated by saying no and focusing on new things. And that's where this agreement thing I've just mentioned is incredibly powerful.
So I'm smiling because, I mean, let's do a quick digression and then I really want to one last question
Sure.
on the power of saying no. What is your heuristic for actually saying no? And how do you, is it here are my OKRs? If it doesn't fall within these, I'm just going to say no to them. Like, what is your heuristic? Because I feel like most founders are terrible at saying no. I'm trying to get better myself at it, but I'm not even great all the time. I personally, I'll just say, like, I use a heuristic in my mind of like, is it worth about $2,000 an hour? Like that's kind of what in my mind, I'm saying the value of my time is. Like I can't charge that today. Although I could charge probably a lot for my time, but like if it's not worth $2,000 an hour, then I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to try to say no. I'm not perfect at that, but that's kind of how I metric it. How do you think through that for yourself? What is your rule from?
That's a great heuristic, right? That's a Naval Ravikant. You're 100% came from Naval. And that's what I really like. You assign some value to your time, right? And I would like, let's say you're running a pre-seed company, right? It's like worth 10 million. You believe by the end of the year, you got it to 20 million. Like you have 30% of the shares, right? So that is 3 million of value creation. Like then you multiply it by some probability of that like company actually getting liquidated. Like there's some sort of liquidity event. You say that's 25%, right? So suddenly you, or like, let's make it easy as 33%. So then you're at 1 million. And then like you divide it by the hours you work every year. And that's how much an hour is worth, right? And like most pre-seed founders, they don't arrive at 2K. And like that's already pro level, right? So I think you really got to be like careful with like, okay, what's the true value? And then you can use that heuristic you've just mentioned really, really well. Secondly, I think there's a couple others, and I think it really also depends on the level you're at yet, right? If you haven't tracked your time before, you're not objectively understanding the where your time goes. I think the base level you start with is, okay, I'm probably highly irrational in my behavior because like that, it's just been shown, prospect theory, like humans are predictably irrational, but they're irrational. And many of the things someone asks us, we say, yes, that's our default answer. That's why entrepreneurs got there in the first place, because they believe, like they say yes to things like things most people don't believe in, right? But then you need to unlearn, right? This is also what many founders don't do. They think that the set of actions that got them to like point X in their career will be the set of actions that gets them point Y, which is further ahead in the future. And that's most of the time in a kind of year or 2-year horizon wrong. There's a new set of actions. And like you need to unlearn like the things that made you successful to get to point X. And need to relearn like new things, and that those will actually get you to point Y. So initially, it might be saying yes, it's great, but at one point it's just not going to be, right? So like all of the rational things, all of the things that happen to you, you just generally say yes. Default mode should be no. That's like level 1. Then level 2 is how well you understand your OKRs, right? Is this a big leverage on OKRs? Is this a small leverage? And that makes things really complicated. It's not just, is it OKR relevant or not? It's like, how big is the impact of this action? And that means, how well do I understand my ICP? How well do I understand my conversion rates? How well do I understand my opportunity cost of my other channels, right? And I would say at that step 2, it's still mostly intuition driven. You just simply don't have the data in order to say, oh, I've looked at like 1 million people on my website, and know exactly, like I can A/B test this. And then level number 3 is you actually create your own company research framework. And for example, we have 35,000 yearly applications right now. We do research. Like, we do statistically significant like testing on like the actions we do, because we have the data. If you don't have the data, don't do it, right? Like, trust your intuition. That's the strongest thing you have as a founder. So I think saying no really depends on kind of the levels you're at, and that will in the end help you at every level, right? Of like personal reflection, personal development. That's kind of different, and you can go deeper and deeper and deeper.
And so I agree with pretty much all of that. I mean, I think getting good at saying no is a skill set you just have to keep working on in life. And it's powerful though, just to be willing to say no to things and saying, like, part of it also, I think, for a founder is, what can only I do that no one else can do? So like, only I can do this podcast. I happen to enjoy it. I think it's interesting. I learn a lot, but it's also good for my company, hopefully good for the ecosystem, lots of value that I think I can provide, and it hits one of our OKRs to do this. On the other hand, I was invited to a happy hour later today by someone who I want to build some partnerships with. I really went back and forth on whether I should go. And I said, you know what, like, I'm going to say no. Because like, I'm already meeting with the person one-on-one later today, actually. And I was like, I don't need to, I mean, it would be helpful to go to his happy hour and like show extra support, but how else can I use that extra hour and a half to do other things that are higher leverage? So it's always a trade-off. Kind of to end it, one of the questions the question I ask everybody at the end of the podcast is, if there's a single piece of advice that you would give to every single founder to be excellent, what is that one piece of advice?
Find the right cadence between action and reflection. I believe most people got their cadence completely off. You follow the typical patterns, and that's the initial definition of C.G. Jung of extroversion and introversion, right? Extroversion are people, like extroverted people, they act first and they think after. And they typically act too much. They need way more reflection in order to adjust their actions in the right learning rate. And other people, they reflect all the time. They never get anything done. They're thinking, and getting the cadence right. Not just reflecting more, not just acting more. Getting the cadence right. That's really where you make the big difference. And most people only think about, oh, I should act more, because I reflect a lot, or like, oh, I should reflect more because I act a lot. No, it's like, it's really about looking at the cadence every week and looking at, okay, did I plan and reflect enough, but did I also like get in enough time for action? And I think if you get that cadence right, no matter what you do, whether you're building a plane, whether you are like you're running a company, whether you're trying to learn to whether you're playing piano and you want to get better at piano, like that, getting that cadence right and getting on the meta level in the right cadence, I think that's really what's going to differentiate the truly great from those people who are merely good at what they're doing.
And I assume the balance of that cadence changes on a weekly, monthly basis, the status of your company, all those things. Like, it's a continuous balancing act.
Yeah, 100%. And that's also the unlearning part, right? Like, at one point, like, you will reflect and you're like, shit, like, this thing that I'm doing, it's no longer serving us as a company anymore. And then you need to be able to act on it. Just having had that reflection is not going to be enough.
Daniel, this has been fantastic. I know I have more questions. We keep going forever, but I need to cut it off. How can folks find you? If they want to get in touch, they want to apply to EWOR, they want to ask you more questions, where can folks find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best channel. Like, it's the only like social media channel I really use. I don't have X or like anything else. I'm just on LinkedIn. So they should add me and quickly reference the podcast so that I know they're coming through this. And then I'll accept, and like we can have a chat.
Amazing. Well, everyone would be lucky to spend time with you. I certainly am. Let me know next time we make it in San Francisco. We can have more croissants. And thank you again for your time. I sincerely appreciate it. Your time is precious. So thank you for spending a little bit of it with me and my audience.
So it's yours. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Really, really appreciate it. Have a lovely day. And I wish you a fantastic one-on-one later.
Thank you. Look forward to all of them always. Thanks again, Daniel.